It's another Madaxeman podcast. This is the second time we're attempting the introduction, but hopefully it'll be slightly more professional as a result of actually having a little bit of practice. I'm here with Richard Case, who is sweeping all before him amongst one of the many Central London players in the upper echelons of the UK AGLG rankings at the moment. And Richard has taken a fantastically successful army to the last competition, or the last competition to take place on kind of a big national level, which was the BHGS Challenge for the first time up at the NEC in Birmingham, a pretty spectacular venue. Hello, Richard. How are you?
I'm good, thanks, Tim. Thank you for inviting me to share a few ideas.
Well, let's hope so. And you're speaking to me from the glamorous Las Vegas of somewhere that is, which part of the country is it?
Hertfordshire, Berkhamsted.
Hertfordshire and Berkhamsted. Okay. Yeah. Is it Berkhamsted or Berkhamsted?
Berkhamsted.
Berkhamsted. All right. Okay. Yeah. You say that very definitely.
Yeah. You swallow as much as possible.
Yes, that's
the Anglo-Saxon contraction. Yeah.
Right. Yes, this has already become a little bit much more X-rated than most of the other rubbish when we talk about in the car back home from somewhere. So the army that appeared to sweep all before it in the BHGS Challenge was the Sassanids, and actually, if this video bit is recording, looking at the previous results from BHGS Challenge at UK Games Expo as we whiz down here, there appeared to be a 1-2-3 clean sweep of the top three places for Sassanid Persian, which in some ways could say that Sassanid Persian is clearly, because we're all war gamers, and we're jumping to conclusions, a completely broken army that invalidates the rules, and the world's about to end, and it will stop competitive gaming in the UK and possibly worldwide within a matter of weeks when everybody cottons onto it. Or possibly you could have a different legitimate reason for taking it, which certainly, with me featuring in third place there, my reason for taking it was I'd just finished painting it and it was new and I'd never used one before. And so I basically cobbled together a list comprised of all the toys I had painted, which is not wildly scientific, but I suspect that your list had maybe a tad more science to it than that one, and I've actually managed to put it here on the wiki. That is the Richard Case Challenge 300 points list here, which I think we played each other in a game that will feature on the website quite soon. And it came as a bit of a shock to me. But talk me through it. Start off by saying what, and I guess this is a theme related thing. What tempted you into jumping with Sassanids in the theme at Challenge?
Well, looking at the theme period, I always like to go for the appropriate knight category. So in the ancient classical periods, that's going to be cataphracts, or in the biblical, it's heavy chariots, and later on it's actual knights, really because of the advantages they have against infantry and the armor they have to resist shooting. So that was the basis of my starting point, is I wanted an army that would include a lot of cataphracts rather than picking Sassanid.
Okay,
so,
because that's an interesting starting point anyway. It's knights clearly are better than cavalry, but they cost more points, and there's plenty of other things that you can do against other infantry. You can throw Roman legionaries at them, you can throw pikemen at them, but do you think is it the mobility, or is it just they're better up heads up in your opinion, or what's the thing for choosing knights in that particular bit of paper, scissors, stone?
I like the fact that they move 3, and as you say, most of the other things that can take on heavy infantry are other heavy infantry moving at 2. So it just gives you that bit more mobility around the table. Obviously, the big disadvantage of the cataphracts versus the later knights is the lack of maneuverability, but pikes have that same challenge. So that is something you've got to take account of in your list design. And I think, like any successful list, you start with a particular point, but you have to look at the list as a whole. Each of the parts has to have a specific function, and where you have, most things are not only successful, most of them have an Achilles heel. And so often what you're trying to do with the rest of the list is address the Achilles heel of your primary troop type.
Okay, so if I replay that back to you in slightly more pithy language, you like cataphracts because they're maneuverable, but unfortunately they're not very maneuverable, so you need something else to help them.
Well, they're fast rather than maneuverable.
Okay, so they fast forwards and backwards.
They're fast, heavy infantry.
Right. Okay. All right. Interesting way of looking at it. So your army, I think starting really, I think when you're looking at the way an army's put together, the first point is what is the distinction of generals, and we've got your section, here, this list here. This was a 300-point competition. In fact, again, maybe another question do you think Sassanids is a much better list at 300, or is it just a list you might have chosen if this was a 200-point competition?
I might have chosen it at 200, but at 300 you've got, you're on
100 more points.
Yeah, you've got 100 more points, but you've only got 7.5 more UD of frontage to cover. So you've got 50% more points, but you've only got 25% more frontage to cover. So it favours armies that have a lot of expensive, high quality troops. So I think Sassanids aren't quite as good at 200 because their flanks are a bit more vulnerable if they go for a lot of high point troop types.
Okay, so some of the sort of charging hairy barbarian cavalry would cause them a lot more trouble at 200 than they do at 300 when they can stick the good stuff in up front and centre.
Yes.
Okay, and you've gone, looking at this, you've gone 2 brilliant, 2 ordinary. Now, I think the ordinary ones are almost exactly the same, aren't they? You've got a 2 heavy cavalry, 4 horse archers. That's a mucky about, sort of mess about little command, and a 3. Oh, actually no, that's 3 cataphracts. Sorry, I'm misreading that and doing you a disservice there. And then the slightly unusual light cavalry bow. So is there even worth a discussion on saying that ordinary one sits out on a flank and flirts and farts around?
So the first ordinary one, the unreliable one, it is very much something to fill a section of the table. It's cheaper because it's unreliable, but because it's there simply to slow the enemy down, if I roll a 1 and the enemy chooses not to come at them, it's already serving its purpose. So I don't mind whether it's reliable or not. And again, I think that's a key point. If you're choosing an unreliable general, you've got to assume as part of your battle plan that it is unreliable, and then work from there.
So would you, was that an embedded general? It doesn't look like it from what I wrote down, but
that one is not. The other ordinary one is embedded.
So what? Because that one to me screams out. Then you've only got 2 heavy cavalry. What's the logic in not embedding that one as well? Or
because you've got 6 bases, and it's much harder for an embedded general to rally from shooting. Whereas if you don't embed him, he can hop along the line and add his encouragement to whoever takes a hit in shooting, because that's a command I'm expecting to end up toe-to-toe shooting with other mounted horse archers.
Okay, and 4 horse archers, that the textbook ADLG thing is to have 2 for the additional point in skirmish. In a pre-game battle setup, but you've gone with 4. Do you see that as a command that is that to bully other groups of 2, or is that to go too deep and actually shoot against proper cavalry?
Well, across the whole army, I've got 9 light horse, so I get the extra +2 on scouting.
Okay, but would you use those 4? Is there something in mind? Is it about bullying other light cavalry, or is it just doing?
Partly, but it's also the fact that as a 4, you can either have 4 in a single rank to hold territory, or you can double them up and get the increased firepower to nibble away at the end of an enemy line.
Okay, and I guess finally, I suppose there's a limit to the number of elites, and it goes up to 12. I think it does go up to 12 at the 300-point game.
Yes.
Were you tempted to take any of the cavalry as non-elite? Because if they are there just to occupy space, or
not really, because I think the extra advantage. I mean, my basic philosophy is normally to go for a lot of elite troops. Experience has taught me that although they are expensive, they're worth the money, and the more points you're using, the more they are worth the money, because you can afford that cost without having too short a line.
Okay, and then your next command running down it is a brilliant general. I can see straight away it's one of those commands that does two different things. So you've got 3 elite cataphracts, you've got 2 more of the heavy cavalry bow elite. You've got a sort of half-hearted Death Star of a javelinman, an elephant, a light infantry bow, and then 3 levy. Levy sat at the back, or did you ever use them? As actual combat troops?
Yeah, I've used them. I used them in a couple of games. So their primary job will be to screen the camp against outflanking enemy light horse. But I also have them ready to come up in a couple of games where there was a single element breakthrough. 3 levy, if you can use the middle one to make the contact and get 2 overlaps, they're not too bad, particularly against enemy cavalry. Obviously against cataphracts, then it's not much fun. Yeah, but against enemy cavalry, they stand a pretty decent chance if they're 3-on-1.
Yeah, because the thing about levy, they're close formation foot, aren't they? So they don't quite skittle over against. Or I believe they're close formation foot. Or maybe am I wrong on that one?
No, they are close formation foot, but okay. I think cavalry get a factor of 1 against them, whereas they get 0 against normal close order foot.
Okay, but you're not getting the extra bits and pieces for going into light medium foot and
exactly.
That sort of
you're
stuff.
Not getting the pluses for hitting medium infantry.
Yeah. Okay, and then so 3 cataphracts, 2 heavy cavalry. Are you using them separately or as a line, or is there a? Because in a way that suddenly looks like to me you're doing 3 different things with this command. You've got cavalry that shoot and skirmish, you've got cataphracts that hit, and then you've got the poor man's Death Star.
Right. Well, again, you have to look at this in connection with the 4th one. So depending on the enemy, I might be deploying the 2 commands with elephants next to each other and concentrating the elephants and mediums together.
So the fourth command is this Kushan ally, which is the interesting joker in the packet. Okay.
So I might do that, or against somebody else, I might be spreading the elephants out if the enemy had a lot of cavalry as opposed to a lot of cataphracts. Then I would tending to be spreading the elephants out to support. Quite often the elephant and the javelinmen are there as much to neutralize enemy elephants as they are to do anything else. And so it's a command that can work together by putting the javelinman between the elephant and the mounted. That stops my own mounted being disorganized. And again, I might use the cavalry to form a link to that first flanking command, or it can also be a bit of a mobile reserve. It's also quite useful if the enemy comes at me with light horse, then I can quite often whip those cavalry round and pin his light horse from the rear and allow my heavy troops to then slam into them.
Yeah, the 2 elite heavy cavalry would shred any light horse quite fairly, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
And then going on from that, in fact, if those 2 things are operating together, let's jump to the brilliant ally, the Kushan, which again is actually it's a sort of similar command. So you've got 3 more elite cataphracts, 4 light horse archers, a kind of an Indian Death Star of an elephant, and a couple of archers which are the mixed swordsman bowmen.
Yeah.
You've got the compulsory terrible horse, which seems to be bedevil every single Indian army, and the skirmisher to screen the elephant. So whilst we've seen these commands that do multiple things, so cataphracts again, elephants again, but here you're sort of swapping 4 horse archers for the 2 Asavan in that other command. But largely this is actually a fairly similar command with a slightly better death start. So is this something that piles up? Because I'm always skeptical about these Indian archers, swordsmen. They're sort of good, and then suddenly they're not very good at all. Is this an army that barrels, or a command that barrels up the middle and takes people on, or does it do something else?
Well, in that competition, I had it play both roles. In some games, it forms one flank with the light horse out wide. I think in our game, we had a waterway. So then what I was able to do is to put the elephant and the archers next to the waterway and advance against enemy cavalry. The advantage of the mixed unit is they shoot as good as bowmen, but the cavalry aren't as destructive against them. They also are, because they've got a protection of 1, if you get into an archery duel, they should win against straight archers because of the extra protection. Normally, they'd be very vulnerable in the open to mounted, but stick an elephant between them and they're resistant. So it's actually a way of having a tougher shooting. The elephant's there really to keep enemy cavalry off while the archers do the damage. And then once the enemy's weakened, then the elephant can be committed.
Actually, yeah, because unlike the classical Indian, this might sound a bit counterintuitive, but this is just a normal elephant. The classical Indian is the more expensive elite elephant, and
correct.
And I can sort of see in this that having an elite elephant is almost overkill. You're spending extra points on something that because of the supports just being mediocre is not necessarily going to charge home at all itself, until it becomes, I guess, arguably a bit more expendable towards the end phase of the game.
Yeah, and one of the reasons I picked the Kushan A was to get I like the look of that support, the elephant supporting the archers, but I wanted 9 elite cataphracts, and by taking the Kushan, I could have the 6 Sassanid ones and the 3 Kushan ones, because I figured very few other people would have 9 elite cataphracts.
It's a big number. So actually in this army you've got, because the Sassanids can have up to 12 elites in the army, but you've got to split that across the cataphracts and the
only half of them would be cataphracts. Yeah.
Okay, so you've got all 6 from the Sassanid ones plus an extra 3, because you've then got that final command which is ordinary, an included general with 3 elite cataphracts, and then the light cavalry bow. So 3 elite cataphracts. I guess you're committing the general. Have you found he dies, or is he actually tough enough with the +1 to pretty much be survivable against most things?
He sometimes dies. So does everything. But I think the point is
that's pretty harsh. That's a pretty harsh way to treat your troops there, Richard.
Yeah. But if he's ordinary, the chances, and you put him into combat, it's quite likely that he can't allocate points out anyway. Mm-hmm. So I've found it's quite good to have one small, tough command like that with an included general. And you can see I've used a couple of mediocre units, and really the cavalry just creates a bit of fun by disorganizing other light horse. It can stick on the end of a line with one of the foot units, and just cause a little bit of awkwardness. And that mediocre Indian cavalry is still line troops. So if you can get it into a position to do flank, you've got something that costs only 5 points, which is highly mobile and can do a lot of damage in the late phase of the game.
Okay, and then did you find with that light cavalry? Because obviously, I think one of the bits that people miss in the rules is that you can't move any form of cavalry with other cavalry. They can only go with other camels. Did you find that was they ended up getting left behind because you were spending points on the cataphracts?
Not usually, because usually those cataphracts are in the middle of the line. So you just leave one space for the camel to run through, because although light horse can normally interpenetrate, because it's a disorganizing type, it can't.
Okay.
So you need to leave a space for it. But quite often, it would be up front early on and then fall back. There's so few units in that command. The general always has one. As long as the cataphracts just want to go forward, they've always got the general's one, and you've always got at least one other pip to move the camels.
Okay. And then I think sort of almost the final question, which I'm sure everybody's been thinking about, if they're listening to this and reading the Sassanid Persian list, no Daylami, and I thought the whole point of using Sassanids was to take Daylami, but you've not used them here in a period with in theory, a lot of heavy foot and Romans that they could smash through.
Right, but you can't take the Daylami with the Kushan. It's not a combination you can have. And I didn't take the list. I took the list for the cataphracts. That's what drove my decision. So I wanted the Kushan. I was sad not to have the Daylami, but at the end of the day, the two other Sassanid armies were based on the elite shooting cavalry plus Daylami, and I think overall, having the extra amount of cataphracts, when it comes to a fight, that tips things in your favour. Okay. Because the thing about the Daylami and the elephants is they can't really go backwards. So they're an anchor point in the enemy line that will force the enemy cavalry to then stop them being isolated, and that allows your cataphracts to get into action.
Right. Okay. So looking at the results, then 4 straight victories, and if this is recorded correct, 4 straight victories and a draw.
Yeah.
So certainly one of those was me, which I think was that number 4.
I think so. Yes.
I think it was round 4. So
I also beat Hubert and Gordon along the way.
Oh wow, you can't argue with that. So who was the person who managed to hang on?
I think it was Peter.
Right, with that enormous Ptolemaic army of pikemen.
Yeah, we got very close, but we just ran out of time.
Right. Okay. So having used that and taken the list and deployed it, does it sit there and it's perfect, or is there anything that you'd look at next time and think, actually, I won the competition, but I learned this and I might do this slightly differently?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always tunes you want to play. I mean, I have to say, my mind, having seen 3 Sassanids win, my mind immediately went to, okay, well, which army is going to beat Sassanids, rather than trying to perfect this list.
So if we flick through the book, which one are you looking at? What would you have taken, knowing what else was there? Is there a Sassanid beater in this particular period?
I don't know. The one I'm thinking hard about is Middle Imperial Roman, which can have a lot of elite unarmored legionaries, and at 300 points, I think it can have 4 medium artillery. Which
I must admit, the artillery is one thing I've been sort of flirting with myself, to think, it forces other people to move, and it can pick off elephants and just knock 1 or 2 little holes in people before they get into combat, which can make a huge difference.
Well, and cataphracts. So yeah. If the trend is towards people using more cataphracts and more elephants, then I think you start looking at infantry that will hang around a bit. So, elite heavy infantry is always going to be slow to die. And then some shooting to wear the enemy down beforehand. And, the elite unarmed legionaries are quite a bit cheaper. They're 11 points, just like regular pikemen. So you can use those extra points to get more length in the line, or maybe even send a small command on a flank march, all of which I think will discomfort the Sassanids, because the one challenge the Sassanid has is it is relatively small because it has so many good expensive troops.
No, I must
That's the
admit,
way to beat it.
I must admit, using it, in some ways, having the waterway down there felt like it was bizarrely almost necessary in some of the games. Otherwise, the table where the terrain sort of falls in the wrong place, and it also sort of stopped anyone else from taking the river and putting it a bit even narrower on the table front. But no, I must admit, I enjoyed using it first time out. I think my list was very different to yours. I think mine was a bit more old school here, with using as many elephants as I owned and all the other stuff that I own, with the big Death Star command, 2 commands with the Asavan and a couple of light horse in each, and then a just straight up the middle cataphract command. But that concept of commands which can do 2 or 3 things and can work together with each other is certainly, I think, the way forward. It just gives you a lot more options about how you deploy and how you spread across the table. Whereas this, I ended up in fairly stereotyped way of playing each game because I only kind of had 4 pieces to put down, whereas the ability to combine those other commands gives you effectively sort of 5 or 6 different ways of deploying, which just makes it more flexible.
Yeah, I mean, when I started, I very much had commands that could all move forward on a single pip. But I think one of the light bulb moments for me is that in most games you get within the 4 of the enemy after turn 1 usually, and therefore if you have a competent or a brilliant general, you can move 3 different groups pretty straightforwardly within the same command. And as you say, that gives you a lot more tactical flexibility. And I would, if people are struggling with their lists, that would be one thing I would encourage people to look at. But then you do have to pay for the command points there, because you can see where I've taken the ordinary generals. They're quite simple commands, and it's the complex ones that have the brilliant generals.
Yeah, I see. So yeah, that's really, you're always moving 2 pieces, maybe 3, and then these you're always moving 1. So
yeah.
So that's a very different way of putting it together. Okay, well look, Richard, that's been brilliant, illuminating. Hopefully the video will work as well. So thank you for your time, and thank you for taking part in this first Skype video online ADLG list deconstruction edition of that's quite good, wasn't it? Of the Madaxeman podcast. It's been useful, and I'm sure we shall talk again. Once again, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Take care.
Bye.